Chapter 13 of the Holy War. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Joy Chan. The Holy War by John Bunyan. Chapter 13. And not many days after he provided for his journey, and went towards Hellgate Hill, into the country where the doubters were, where he heard of all that had been talked of in Mansoul, and he perceived also that Diabolus was almost ready for his march, etc. So he came back with speed, and, calling the captains and elders of Mansoul together, he told them where he had been, what he had heard, and what he had seen. Particularly, he told them that Diabolus was almost ready for his march, and that he had made old Mr. Incredulity, that once brake prison in Mansoul, the general of his army, that his army consisted all of doubters, and that their number was above 20,000. He told, moreover, that Diabolus did intend to bring with him the chief princes of the infernal pit, and that he would make them chief captains over his doubters. He told them, moreover, that it was certainly true that several of the Black Den would, with Diabolus, ride reformades to reduce the town of Mansoul to the obedience of Diabolus their prince. He said, moreover, that he understood by the doubters, among whom he had been, that the reason why old Incredulity was made general of the whole army was because none truer than he to the tyrant, and because he had an implacable spite against the welfare of the town of Mansoul. Besides, said he remembers the affronts that Mansoul has given him, and he is resolved to be revenged of them. But the black princes shall be made high commanders, only Incredulity shall be over them all, because, which I had almost forgot, he can more easily and more dexterously beleaguer the town of Mansoul than can any of the princes besides. Now when the captains of Mansoul, with the elders of the town, had heard the tidings that Mr. Prywell did bring, they thought it expedient, without further delay, to put into execution the laws that against the Dibelonians their prince had made for them, and given them in commandment to manage against them. Wherefore forthwith a diligent and impartial search was made in all houses in Mansoul, for all and all manner of Dibelonians. Now in the house of Mr. Mind and in the house of the great Lord Wilbywill were 2 Dibelonians found. In Mr. Mind's house was one Lord Covetousness found, but he had changed his name to Prudent Thrifty. In my Lord Wilbywill's house one Lasciviousness was found, but he had changed his name to Harmless Mirth. These 2 the captains and elders of the town of Mansoul took and committed them to custody under the hand of Mr. Trueman, the jailor. This man handled them so severely, and loaded them so well with irons, that in time they both fell into a very deep consumption, and died in the prison-house. Their masters also, according to the agreement of the captains and elders, were brought to take penance in the open place, to their shame, and for a warning to the rest of the town of Mansoul. Now this was the manner of penance in those days. The persons offending, being made sensible of the evil of their doings, were enjoined upon confession of their faults and a strict amendment of their lives. After this the captains and elders of Mansoul sought yet to find out more Dibelonians wherever they lurked, whether in dens, caves, holes, vaults, or where else they could, in or about the wall or town of Mansoul. But though they could plainly see their footing, and so follow them by their track and smell to their holds, even to the mouths of their caves and dens, yet take them, hold them, and do justice upon them, they could not. Their ways were so crooked, their holds so strong, and they so quick to take sanctuary there. But Mansoul did now with so stiff an hand rule over the Dibelonians that were left, that they were glad to shrink into corners. Time was when they durst walk openly and in the day, but now they were forced to embrace privacy and the night. Time was when a Mansoulian was their companion, but now they counted them deadly enemies. This good change did Mr. Prywell's intelligence make in the famous town of Mansoul. By this time Diabolus had finished his army, which he intended to bring with him for the ruin of Mansoul, and had set over them captains and other field officers, such as liked his furious stomach best. Himself was lord paramount, Incredulity was general of his army. The highest captains shall be named afterwards, but now for their officers' colours and scutcheons. 1. Their first captain was Captain Rage. He was captain over the election doubters. His were the red colours. His standard-bearer was Mr. Destructive, and the great red dragon he had for escutcheon. 2. The second captain was Captain Fury. He was captain over the Vocation Doubters. His standard-bearer was Mr. Darkness. His colours were those that were pale, and he had for escutcheon the fiery flying serpent. 3. The third captain was Captain Damnation. He was captain over the Grace Doubters. His were the red colours. Mr. No Life bare them, and he had for escutcheon the Black Den. 4. The fourth captain was Captain Insatiable. He was captain over the Faith Doubters. His were the red colours. Mr. Devourer bare them, and he had for escutcheon the Yawning Jaws. 5. The fifth captain was Captain Brimstone. He was captain over the Perseverance Doubters. His also were the red colours. Mr. Burning bare them, and his scutcheon was the blue and stinking flame. 6. The sixth captain was Captain Torment. He was captain over the Resurrection Doubters. His colours were those that were pale. Mr. Gnaw was his standard-bearer, and he had the black worm for escutcheon. 7. The seventh captain was Captain No Ease. He was captain over the Salvation Doubters. His were the red colours. Mr. Restless bare them, and his scutcheon was the ghastly picture of death. 8. The eighth captain was the Captain Sepulchre. He was captain over the Glory Doubters. His also were the pale colours. Mr. Corruption was his standard-bearer, and he had for escutcheon a skull and dead men's bones. 9. The ninth captain was Captain Past Hope. He was captain of those that are called the Felicity Doubters. His standard-bearer was Mr. Despair. His also were the red colours, and his scutcheon was a hot iron and the hard heart. These were his captains, and these were their forces. These were their standards, these were their colours, and these were their scutcheons. Now over these did the great Diabolus make superior captains, and they were in number 7, as namely, the Lord Beelzebub, the Lord Lucifer, the Lord Legion, the Lord Apollyon, the Lord Python, the Lord Cerberus, and the Lord Belial. These 7 he set over the captains, and Incredulity was Lord General, and Diabolus was king. The Reformades also, such as were like themselves, were made some of them captains of hundreds, and some of them captains of more. And thus were the army of Incredulity completed. So they set out at Hellgate Hill, for there they had their rendezvous, from whence they came with a straight course upon their march toward the town of Mansoul. Now, as was hinted before, the town had, as Shaddai would have it, received from the mouth of Mr. Prywell the alarm of their coming before. Wherefore they set a strong watch at the gates, and had also doubled their guards. They also mounted their slings in good places, where they might conveniently cast out their great stones to the annoyance of their furious enemy. Nor could those Dibelonians that were in the town do that hurt as was designed they should, for Mansoul was now awake. But alas, poor people! They were sorely affrighted at the first appearance of their foes, and at their sitting down before the town, especially when they heard the roaring of their drum. This, to speak truth, was amazingly hideous to hear. It frighted all men 7 miles round, if they were but awake and heard it. The streaming of their colours was also terrible and dejecting to behold. When Diabolus was come up against the town, first he made his approach to Eargate, and gave it a furious assault, supposing, as it seems, that his friends in Mansoul had been ready to do the work within. But care was taken of that before, by the vigilance of the captains. Wherefore, missing of the help that he expected from them, and finding his army warmly attended with the stones that the slingers did sling. For that I will say for the captains, that considering the weakness that yet was upon them by reason of the long sickness that had annoyed the town of Mansoul, they did gallantly behave themselves. He was forced to make some retreat from Mansoul, and to entrench himself and his men in the field without the reach of the slings of the town. Now, having entrenched himself, he did cast up 4 mounts against the town. The first he called Mount Diabolus, putting his own name thereon, the more to affright the town of Mansoul. The other 3 he called thus, Mount Electo, Mount Megara, and Mount Tisiphone, for these are the names of the dreadful furies of hell. Thus he began to play his game with Mansoul, and to serve it as doth the lion his prey, even to make it fall before his terror. But, as I said, the captains and soldiers resisted so stoutly, and did do such execution